Erdol from
the Wi-Fi off.
Florida Atlantic University. She's a director of the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. And Dr. Garlan, he's a Carnegie Mellon University professor. He was invited this afternoon to present and discuss his research at the university. And we bring it over here to follow up and for you guys to learn more about self-adaptive software architectures and software architecture in general. Dr. Garlan is a lead scientist and a very well-known professor from Carnegie Mellon in this field, and he's an authority in everything related to software architectures and related issues in computer and software engineering. So we welcome Dr. Garlan here, and our host Alice is right next to him.
Almost.
And your host Edwin will be in the controls today. And Dr. Garlan right here.
So, Dr. Garlan, thank you so much for coming and being with us in BIZTECH. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about yourself. You know, we always hear you in settings, very rigorous settings, talking about what you do for a living, especially coming from such a prestigious university as Carnegie Mellon. But let's discover you for a nanosecond, if you allow us, and tell us a little bit what got you started into this. What's your interest?
Well, it took me a long time before I got into computer science, actually. I had many years when I wasn't quite sure what to do, and then discovered that this was an area that was going to be really important. But even in those days, it was actually just starting up. So I was a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon at a time when there were maybe only 40 people in the department, and it was one of the first departments of computer science. Well, now it's grown to 1,000, 2,000 people, and so huge. But when I started, it was like a field in which you could know everything about computing. You could be a programmer, you could know how to do hardware design, you could do all of that. Today, it's become very specialized, so you only learn part of it.
And how does this part nowadays interact with each other? Like you said, it has become almost like more complex,
Much
right?
more complex, yeah, and much more specialized, but at the same time, lots and lots of crossovers. Not as much within the discipline, but outside the discipline. So today, pretty much every field of science and many humanities depend on computing, one way or another, and require people to understand how to analyze data, large amounts of data, how to perform interesting computations over them. Today, how to machine learn interesting facts about things. And as a result, computer science is no longer just a science sort of by itself. It's much more reaching out these days to other disciplines. And we see that now in a convergence between computing and cars, for example, self-driving cars, or computing and robots. So almost everything that people now are familiar with or new emerging things are controlled by software. So, you know, the crossovers these days are in many cases outside computer science now.
Right. And what is your position with CMU?
I am a professor of computer science. I'm also the associate dean for master's programs. I've been there about 28 years.
So you have seen the entire change?
I have, yes. Yeah.
What's the biggest and most notorious change you've seen?
Wow. Well, I think viewed from a very high level, it's the specializations I was talking about. So today, when I was a graduate student, there was one department, you learned everything about everything. I took courses in artificial intelligence, hardware design, programming. Today, we have a school of computer science. It has 6 departments, departments that are doing things from robotics to human-machine interfaces to software engineering. And so what you see is now, when you study computer science, you don't just do it all. You go into a specialty typically. In the same way with medicine. probably is a good
It's
example.
exactly where I was going to go. Is this like medicine nowadays, that you have the doctor specialized in fingers, and then the other one is in the hand, and the other one is in the arm?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
straight to just one body part almost.
Yeah, I would say very similar. And in a similar way, there's also foundations you need to know. So doctors need to know chemistry and biology and anatomy and all of those things, no matter what they specialize in. So there are very close similarities to that.
Right.
The difference really is, let's say, the human body isn't changing too rapidly, whereas technology is changing very fast. And so things that were totally conceptual and improbable 5 years ago now are reality. And so fields crop up very quickly and suddenly reach critical mass, and then there are lots and lots of people working in it. So it's a much more dynamic world than you would find in let's say, medicine.
How was your session, and what was your session about in FAU?
My session was about what we call self-adaptive systems. And what this is about is really, when we think about the software that runs everything today, we'd like the software to be, use the term resilient. It means it doesn't crash or completely fail, even if bad things happen. So if the network goes down, or a server stops working, or a disk crashes, or someone tries to do an attack on it, the system will continue to function and deliver capability. So there's a kind of resilience to that we'd like to build into software. And in the past, that hasn't been the case. Software has been very brittle. It's been very easy to crash it, to make it fail in many ways. Today, if Google goes down for a day, we're all totally hosed, or Facebook, right? So companies like that, and many companies now rely on the fact that they can continue to run no matter what. So to do that, you need to build systems that have built-in mechanisms to repair themselves, to notice problems. There's an analogy often made between that and the human body. In fact, this area is sometimes called autonomic computing, in reference to the autonomic functions of the body. So when the room gets too warm, you sweat, and you don't have to think about it, right? Your body naturally adapts to the environment because it has built-in mechanisms to do that.
So it's almost instinctual.
Yes, it's similar, although it's in some ways it's a little more mechanical than mental. But yeah, right, it's sort of mechanisms that allow the system to continue to operate even, under strange circumstances.
Did you ever imagine that metadata will be the monetizing gold mine of anybody or everyone and whomever, including us with our live feeds?
Metadata. Well, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think all data these days is monetizable, some more than others. And that's a big change now. I think people didn't realize that until Google started keeping all this data and turning it into actionable advertising and targeting and so on. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that's so different. In many ways, people have tried to understand demographics and other properties of populations to do advertising and to do whatever. So I think we just have more tools now to do that, and a lot more data to base those things on.
Right. But tell us a little bit about Mars, Rainbow, and other research projects, more in the depth of field that you're in.
Right. So I was talking about self-adaptive systems, and it's a nice idea in principle. How do you make systems recover and fix themselves, sort of self-healing systems? But if you actually want to do that, you can't just do that on a piece of paper. You have to actually go out and build systems that show how it's going to work. And so the case of Rainbow, a way to make large-scale and if they get stuck, to figure out a way to get unstuck.
Absolutely.
Right. So this idea of adaptation, of recognizing when you've got a problem and then figuring out what to do about it, applies in robots, and it applies to e-commerce websites and many other things. So these different projects have different domains, different kinds of things. Another big project we have is on security. So today we worry a lot about hackers taking your system down. So you would really like the system to detect when you've been hacked and figure out what to do about that.
Actually, it's a new career. Echoing to what you were saying, that in the beginning of your
Right.
steps into this world of technology and software, you were studying a little bit of everything. Now their entire careers in universities almost dedicated to a field within.
Completely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally. And security is particularly pressing now, and privacy for that matter. So there's a lot of interest in how do you, because the other way to deal with security is you have a lot of humans sitting there trying to fix systems when they break. And that turns out to be kind of expensive and not always effective. So if you can automate the things that humans do in terms of protecting the system and recovering, then you have a much more effective system.
How do you see the future of software architecture?
Software architecture.
That's a deep one because that's your specialty.
Yeah, it is. And I didn't talk about that yet, really.
Well, let's just start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will have in our audience people that know a lot about this subject, and people who are mainly interested or intrigued that have heard about it and say, "What the heck?"
Yeah, what is it? Yeah.
Yeah, what is this?
Good question. So, I often get asked, well, what is software architecture? So most people have a concept of what a programmer is, right? They go off, they write code, they make systems work. You can kind of think about programmers as something like construction workers. They know how to put bricks on top of each other and pound nails and paint walls and do things like that. But if you're going to build a skyscraper, you can't just turn a bunch of construction workers loose on it and say, go build me a skyscraper. You have to have a plan. You have to have blueprints. You have to have someone who has the whole picture in mind of how it's all going to fit together and what it's going to look like in the end. Those people have probably never laid a brick in their lives. So they're not programmers, they're not construction workers, but they're thinking about the overall end result of what you're going to get.
And the functionality of it.
That's right. So they have to know a lot about, well, should I use brick or aluminum or wood? They have to understand the materials they're working with, which might, in this case, be the programming languages that you use to create the system. They need to think about what are the building blocks. Can I just buy doors, or do I have to make my own doors? But they're thinking about how do I put this whole thing together. So in software, it's very similar. If you're going to build a large system, you need someone who has that perspective. And we've always known that, that building complex big systems is hard. And there were always people in organizations, successful organizations, who could do that. But until I started working with some colleagues on this, no one had kind of written it down so that others could learn how to do that. And
Are you considered the pioneer of it?
Yes, one of them.
One of them.
Right, yeah. So I wrote the first book on software architecture with my colleague Mary Shaw, and we attempted to show people what was different about architecture and why it wasn't the same as programming, and what kinds of things you have to think about when you're an architect that you don't think about when you're writing code.
What happened when you published this book? What happened in the architecture of software world, in the software world, but what happened to you?
What happened to me? Well, I got
Was
tenure.
that a break? That's a good one. Okay, that's a tangible one. So let's go deep in it a little bit.
Yeah, no.
That's a dream, right, for
yeah,
professors?
well, I was very lucky because, and I think many people who are successful are often lucky because they pick to work on the right thing at the right time. And the field of software engineering broadly was struggling with how do we deal with the complexity of systems as they get more and more sophisticated and larger and complex and distributed. How do we manage this? And so they were ready. People were ready in the field for some higher order, higher level thinking of how do we understand a system without looking at all the details. And so what Mary and I did was basically to talk to people and understand better how they thought about systems at this level, and then write it down and say, look, these are the patterns people use. These are the ways they think about it. And so it was essentially to write down what people were doing already, but just they didn't have words for it. They didn't have names. They didn't have a regular way to teach that. So we were able to say, look, let's take all this knowledge, put it together, create a subfield of it, and now you can teach courses in software architecture. You can get training courses in it. There are conferences in it. There are journals about it, and so on. So it became its own subfield because the time was right. And for me, I was really just happy that I could be part of that, riding that wave. And it was really nice to see that this was helping to crystallize a whole new subfield. And today, you know, people routinely accept the fact that software architecture is an important thing.
Right.
Whereas before, people had no idea really what it meant. So, so personally, that was very gratifying. And, you know, at some point, though, it's interesting when you have something that's successful like that, and it starts to transition into practice and people take it over, and then as an academic you say, well, wait a minute, this is a little boring now. Now what do I do?
What do you do?
And
what
so,
are you up to?
Yeah, well, and so that's where I started getting involved in self-adaptive systems.
Okay.
And so I've been working with others to create a new subfield of that. So getting people to think about systematically, how do you get systems to be more resilient, as I was saying before.
You're creating a very sweet spot for me with that word. You know, I have been working with certain artists who have an engineering, architectural development background, and that has become the leitmotif of the last, I will say, 6 months. Especially being here in South Florida, we went through a terrific, quote-unquote, horrible, really, summer in 2017, summer-fall, with all the hurricanes and also all the impacts of earthquakes in Mexico, whether we like it or not. It made an impact here, weather-wise. Then we had Puerto Rico. I mean, the whole thing went bananas. So we are proposing new ways of thinking, new ways of acting, adapting, how to build in the future. So it's very interesting that from all the fields I'm getting involved with, everyone has a common word. And I love it because we may speak different languages. You know, you're in your field and me in my specialty, but then we may find a common ground where we can create a really big impact around the world and bring us into another conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I know, it's nice when a community kind of coalesces. You know, it's sort of, often you have all these things going on independently, and then something serves to bring them together, and then you get something that's more than the sum of the parts coming out of it.
Right. I was just visiting a couple engineers from France with an interesting concept in a resilient home that can go soil, water, and vice versa, and through hydraulics. And I was absolutely in an awe moment. Of course, as a girl, I'm already decorating the house. Can't help it. That's the blonde in me. I always joke about it. But thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, all of you. And I want to give the opportunity to Edwin. Do you want to address some questions to Dr. Garlan, since we have the honor to have him here?
Yeah, actually, like I was taking a look at the stitch. stitch paper. So
Yeah,
I thought it was pretty cool the way you guys defined the new language.
Yeah, yeah.
It looks, so, but looking at the code, I was like, well, why didn't you just write that in like
Yeah, well,
regular language?
let me talk about that. Yeah. So when you're creating a system that repairs itself, you need some way to tell it how to repair itself. Sometimes we call that a repair strategy. So if it notices that part of the system is down, how does it go about bringing it back up or fixing it? And so our first inspiration for how to do that was to ask people, how do they do that? Because there are a lot of operators who sit in front of these screens and try to figure out what to do when the system breaks. And so you say, well, what do you do when the server goes down? So, oh, well, we do this and we do this. And we learned by talking to them, interviewing them, what they cared about. And we discovered some things that said, we have to create a special language in order to write down the kinds of decision-making that people use. So for example, they might say, well, I don't always know what the problem is, so I might try this. And if that works, then I'll do this. Otherwise, I'm going to do that. So that means now they're making decisions. So you have to, and they said, well, sometimes I have to wait for 2 minutes to see if it comes back or not. So now we know we need timing in there. And then they say, well, I could do A or B. If I did A, it's going to cost me more, but B will be better for the users.
Right.
So now I have to make trade-offs. So now we get a notion of formally utility. And so all of these things we discovered by talking to people that they think about. And we said, well, we're going to have to create a language that we can make the computer think in the same way. So that's where this language Stitch came from. And
so that's your new language?
Well, it's one of many languages, but yeah, it's the one for programming strategies, repair strategies. And the nice thing about it is it has a very mathematical interpretation, which means you can take something in that language and you can give it to a tool, another software system, and say, analyze this for me. Tell me how well it's going to work in different settings. And so, but it's one of many languages you might use to program these adaptive systems.
Edwin, do you want to come here on stage? Are you staying in Techie?
I wanted Dr. Erdol to
Yes, I was going to say. We have another lady in the room. Share with the stage.
So we are switching pose right now, so we're going to bring Dr. Erdol to...
So we'll be right back. Well, you're still in the middle of everything.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
Sure. Oh, that's your unplug me.
Yeah, go for it. That was easy.
To make things easier, why don't we just hand her the mic?
No, she's right there.
Yeah, okay.
Now your turn. The hot spot, like I call it.
So hope you guys enjoyed Dr. Garlan. He is, you can find his website right here on the screen.
Let's see what I can do here, because it's in this way.
Garlan, and he has all this project that we're discussing here. Mars, Stitch stuff is actually online.
Sorry.
Stitch, is downloadable.
Sorry for the marriage. Okay.
Learn more about the future of self-adaptive systems if you're interested in something. We're going to speak with Dr. Erdol, who had
Beautiful.
the honor and very nice gesture to come and join us this afternoon. And let's see.
Like they say, like this?
You continue there, Alice. I think it's still like we need to master this broadcast here. Slide is kind of hard to switch.
Well, it's very hard to be in your shoes right now, Edwin. Let's confess. I mean, you're being master control.
We have these computers here on the table because we automated this. We're software driven because this is like the old-fashioned way. So you have to have a whole crew of people. So we're looking at ways to use machine learning technique to learn when to switch camera, when something is interesting, things like that. but we're still, that's still in the works. It's still not ready for prime time. So.
Plus, losing a crew member today didn't work out. The best, right?
Right, right.
We're going to
So-
switch back to you, Alice.
It's always like that.
For electrical and computer engineering at the Florida Atlantic University right here in Boca Raton. And go ahead, Alice.
I wanted to ask you, as a female in a field that has traditionally been male-dominated,
Yes.
how did you do your breakthrough?
One day at a time, I suppose. We're still a big minority in the field. There are our women students are about 10 to 15% of the students, and the faculty are less. And I'm the first department chair at Florida Atlantic University in the College of Engineering and Computer Science. But shortly after I became chair, now we have a dean who's a woman. So I guess,
Uh-huh.
yes.
I'm sure this is a topic that
With the what we call the iSense pillar. It's the Sensing Institute that is technical sensors. And so we were very pleased to have him, and it was an honor to introduce him, and everyone was happy. The lecture went very well. So we'll invite him again.
wonderful.
Yes, and he's collaborating with our colleagues.
Okay.
Yes, so we
So-
hope to see him more often.
Absolutely, we'd love to have him back.
Yes.
And what is your lineup coming up? I mean, you have more lectures, right? How often they occur, and where people can search or find
So we
information
have,
about it?
yes, we have several places, but one of them is, I can't remember the exact URL now, but iSense Lecture Series. Then the College of Engineering and Computer Science, Florida Atlantic University,
We will post it
Distinguished
on
Lecture
the website.
Series. And then, did you say to stop?
No,
So
we got distracted.
So, and also we have colleagues who visit, and we always organize, so they're the random visitors who give lectures, talks. We have students who give talks. We have a journal club in the department, and they meet regularly. So they're different venues. Yeah.
So is it once a week, once a month, a lecture?
Last week we had 3 lectures.
Okay.
So it depends, but as I said, they're competing programs. But iSense, this lecture that we did jointly with the iSense pillar is almost at the rate of once a month.
That's wonderful.
About, roughly, because we have to arrange with the availability of the speaker, but it's on Thursdays, so.
Wonderful. So follow us, follow them, and check what's coming up next in the lecture series of FAU. What else are we saying as closing remarks, Edwin?
I think there's a lot of people interested in the Facebook chat. So I think we should probably make the room bigger next time.
All right.
Yes.
You get a bigger auditorium or a classroom. And so we want to wrap up and thank Dr. Erdol and Dr. Garlan for coming and joining us. And the idea with this series is to bring to the community experts like you guys, so they can get in touch with what's going on for real, not get the news from like a blog or something that there's no reputation, right? You're an authority in the field, so people will get interested. Probably more engineers will get motivated to join. More female engineers probably in the next 5 years, 10 years will be replacing more male engineers that are today in most of the tech startups and tech companies in the United States and the world. Thank you very much, and
Thank you for being in BIZTECH, and I'm Alice.
I'm Edwin.
Thank you. Follow us, BIZTECH.tv.
Bye-bye.